3.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jalani Eanochs. I am a mechanical engineering major, a freshman at this time, and I am doing an interview with a very great Black poet, Black African American woman poet, Miss J. Eileen. Hello, Miss J. Eileen. How are you doing?
Oh, well, thank you.
That's great. So, I'm here to talk to you about your new book of poetry, your magnum opus, as we want to call it, wholesome whole poetry. And I just have a few questions to ask you about the inspiration and some of the poems and all the thinking that went behind into it. So, I think the first question is we'll get started off. Can you introduce yourself further to the audience and tell them a bit about your journey from chaplaincy to poetry?
Oh, from chaplaincy to poetry. I think it's all interrelated. So, my poetry always includes spirituality and yeah, mind, body, and spirit. It all my poetry encompasses all three components of being a human being.
Okay. Is there any background that you had before you started to write your book of poetry as a chaplain? And were there any experiences?
No, so I never studied poetry or creative writing formally in school. So I began writing as a way to process how I felt every day. So when I encountered different emotions or when I felt overwhelmed, I would just begin to write good, bad, or ugly. It's just the way that I process so I can better understand what's going on within myself.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Um, so, as a chaplain, your spirituality, as you said, what you felt at that point in time, interject into your poetry is what influenced you to write. Personally, as I said before, I'm a mechanical engineering major, and although my major is mechanical engineering, I was homeschooled for most of my life, and a lot of emotions that came to me. I tried to write poetry, but it wasn't as great as yours. But I understand where you're coming from. Being homeschooled, you have a lot of time to think, a lot of time to write, and and when I came to college, I was able to more get into that avenue as I started taking English composition classes. So I totally understand what you mean by that. So that pretty much leads to my second question. Um, is there anything you could tell us more about what influenced you really to start writing, as to put it in a book or whatnot, and what is or are the inspirations for your poems, whether it be a person or you know.
Okay, so you asked me what made me want to, or what's the story behind getting published?
Yes. Yeah.
So, September 16th, 2018, my best friend died unexpectedly. We were um, the same age, but just one day apart. So it was my way of trying to fight for myself to live. We had been best friends for 26 years. So I knew her a large part of my adult life. So um, for a long time, it took me quite some time to get myself back. It it was it was really hard. It was
Yeah.
really hard. Yeah.
So during this time, what poems can you name, if you remember, some of the poems that you wrote during this time?
Oh, those poems aren't in this book.
Oh, okay. I
No,
apologize.
they're
Yes,
not.
ma'am.
I have another collection of poetry that I wrote about her death. Those aren't in there, but I needed something beyond outside of myself to fight for. To me,
Hmm.
sometimes it's not just good enough just to work. And then when you lose
Right.
someone that's very important to your life, someone that you talk to regularly, someone that you hang out with, someone that you bounce ideas off with, and then they're gone. It's like you have this big vacuum in your life. So you
Right.
have to figure out a way to um, still maintain normality and still fight for yourself and still forge ahead, because it would have been easy for me to decide to just give up.
Right. But you just decided to keep moving. And the poems were a way for you to express that and to put it down in the writing and to what's the word? Release yourself in a way.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So does your experience? I know that you said earlier to me before this that you were a mental health worker. Does your experience as a mental health worker influence the feelings of pathos or sadness that is present in some of your poems, such as shadow wrestling and mourning?
Um, yes. But actually I wrote these poems before I even formally became a chaplain. So
Hmm.
I do use some of my poetry. Um, I incorporate in some of my spiritual practice with other people,
Hmm.
and I let them try to figure out or process how do they see themselves in the poem. I never
Hmm.
let them know that I wrote it, because then they'll be trying to psychoanalyze me, and I'm like, no, 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 I'm not the topic. It's you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, especially shadow wrestling. The reason I mention that because it's a very internal sort of struggle. So, what was the thought process behind that? That's really what I was trying to get to. What is
Shadow
it?
wrestling.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me see. I'm gonna read it real quick.
Oh, that'll be great. Yes, ma'am.
Um, you don't know what page is on, do you?
No, ma'am. I don't. I should have had the book on me actually.
I have the book.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's see. Oh, wrestling with shadows from the cavernous abyss of memory lane, the deep grown shriek. Oh, I do. So the poem says, wrestling with shadows from the cavernous abyss of memory lane, the deep grown shriek. Haunted, jilted, traumatized by the depressive gloom, overpowering and overwhelming the sensibility, jumping blindly in the dark, flailing about from the walls of each memory, contained in a safe place under lock and key, only to be entangled in the intricacies of the fine lines of the brain freeways to the heart, of invisible silk strings or the elaborate elastic spider's web, entrapped with the shadows, clobbered by fear, trying not to succumb to the deluge of anxiety that rides high, drowning all life, scrambling to find higher ground, cutting, pushing, defending what little piece of my soul is left. Silence is golden, especially when the shrills from my heart rings loud in my ears. The body remembers. It will never forget each battle scar that was carved into the skin of my memory with a dull knife. The body remembers each jagged edged word that chomped at the wound, infecting it, making it blister, bubble, and bleed. My soul remembers the invisible wounds I carry that hurt the most, keloid scars from memory lane that are wrapped around the chambers of this beating heart, extending occupied like tentacles to other vital organs. I've died this death 1,000 times over, only to be resuscitated back to life, to live again.
Mm.
So, in this particular poem, I was talking about complicated grief. So, everyone has a dream that they've mourned, or a relationship that they've mourned, or some ideal thing that they've mourned, and they have different triggers. Um, for me myself, for a long time, I really wanted to have the perfect life, go to college, have 2.5 kids, get married, all that good stuff. But my
Right.
life hasn't worked out that way. So, sometimes when you look at all your friends, I know people are like, well, you can't compare yourself to somebody else, but it's sometimes it's kind of difficult because in our culture and in our society, we compare ourselves daily, or we compete with other people, always trying to get to the next level. And
Right.
sometimes when you feel as if, or I felt like I wasn't achieving, it would it would make me um it would make me feel sad. So I
Right.
was wrestling with memories
Mhm.
and grieving a dream that never came to pass.
Yes, man. Thank you so much for the reading and explanation. Um, Beautiful explanation, and that's pretty much what the crux of my question was. That sort of internal struggle of grief, and what, especially when you see other people uh, do other things that's different from you, especially when you wanted to do it. So, okay, I believe we can move along. So you mentioned briefly your three divisions: body, soul, and spirit, and how that ties into the spiritual portion. Um, do Can you more in depth explain each of those three and what they mean based upon all the poems that are contained in those divisions?
Oh wow. Maybe not in depth, but this is the mantra that I work from,
Mm-hmm.
is um what you believe and what you think is what you do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so that ties in. So what you believe and what you think is what you. So
Is what
what?
you
So that ties in. So what? So is it attached to body, soul, and spirit? How is it attached to those?
mind, body, and spirit.
Hmm.
Um, what I think, how I perceive the world through my different emotions impacts how I feel, impacts whether I choose to stay connected to a community, or whether I choose to isolate, or whether I choose to cope with my emotions in a positive way, or whether I choose to cope with them in a negative way. Some people, everyone doesn't cope the same. So, luckily enough for me, I cope with a lot of things that I find difficult in life through writing. But I also encounter a lot of people who don't cope with life, or have difficulties coping with life. So they may um, display a lot of risky behaviors. Some people drink, some people um, use other substances to soothe or to self medicate, but that's not how I choose to do it. Personally, I rather have a purse or a new pair of shoes.
Yeah.
So I just can't see me just giving my money away like that. Boom. Um, so and when it comes to the person, I know that working in a hospital setting, every discipline has its own concentration. But what I like about being a chaplain is the fact that I look at the whole person. I
Mhm.
see them from a whole different perspective. I get to ask them questions about, what is their perspective about God. So all that comes through in my writing, because I'm still a formally trained theologian, but before I became a theologian, I was the one who volunteered in church all the time.
Mhm.
So for me, when I rededicated my life to God when I was 24.
Mhm.
So but from 24 until now, that's it's been a very long journey, a very long process of me trying to figure out who God is. What does God mean to me? How do my emotions impact my behavior? How do my emotions or my mental process affect how I choose to relate to other people? And it's not easy. I'm just a human being that's just trying to get it right like everybody else.
Right. Okay. That was a very great explanation. I thank you for that. Um, Very in depth. You actually went into depth into what you into the body, soul, and spirit thing. So thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. So we're gonna move more into the book now. Dr. Bill F. Indy notes in his review of your book that your poems, a good number of them, they deal with romance, yet they calmly walk the lines between purity and worldly sensuality. So, especially me, because I just want to know, how do you concentrate those emotions so expertly without watering them down or adulterating the meaning of the words in the poem?
Mm, that's a hard question. How do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's just how I express myself. I don't think that there is a disconnect between spirituality and sexuality. That's number one. I don't think that if so the Bible says, and I'm just going to use this as an example. If the Bible says everything that God created is good, and then society says that the black body, because I'm an African American woman, that the black body is um bad, or it's over hypersexualized. That's not necessarily true. As an African American woman, I still I long and I yearn for someone to love me the same way that God loves me. That's unconditionally.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I have friends that love me unconditionally? Sure, I do. But when it comes to the romantic part, what woman doesn't want a man that's going to love her like God loves her?
Mm-hmm.
That's that's a pretty heavy burden for any man to try to carry. Um so that's expressed. I mean, I'm a human being. I have a whole body. And that's what I try to get across to everyone. You know, just because I may feel a certain way doesn't mean that I have to act upon it.
Right.
But I choose to express it in writing because that's a safe space.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Thank you so much for that explanation. Because, and the reason I was asking the question was because when I read your poems, of course it dealt with romance, but it wasn't like earlier poems that I read. You're like, oh, let me hurry up, and switch the page. It was, you're actually delving into human emotions. It's just the same to me as reading about sorrow, or it's just about the same as reading about a death of a character, you know. And I was just asking to see if so. And you were saying that that's just a natural sort of thing, right?
Right.
Just to write in that manner. Okay. Okay. Um, let's see. So moving further, regarding the poems that deal with internal issues in your outside relationships, such as Kingdom and Drum Rolls of Thunder, especially. Um, what was your thought process behind those poems, and furthermore, how did you learn to put such emotions into words like this? Because you say you weren't trained as a poet.
Mhm. So, Drum Rolls of Thunder. Let's see. That is on page part.
That's
That's
sixty
page
ninety
96.
six. Yes. Oh,
Mhm.
I have the book.
Ah, okay. Drum Rolls of Thunder. Actually, I remember writing this poem, and I wrote this poem. Um, I was at my mom's house. She lives in Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a thunderstorm that was coming through, but I was also um just upset about something else. So I just started to write. Sometimes I can write anywhere. It doesn't matter what's going on around me. I can, if as long as I have a pen and a piece of paper or a napkin or something to write on, I can. But the poem says, drum rolls of thunder in the distance, rumblings from the northwest horizon, like low groanings from the heavens, swelling like rolling tides to a monsoon like state, only to shrink to soft moans of the inner workings of my brain. As my thoughts zigzag, colliding with the conscious state, my heart has been awakened to while thunder marches across the open plain of possibilities to meet the bubbling, vehement gusts of winds as they tumble and push back, clashing in the core of earth like iron strikes iron, shaking the ground, rattling the bones of the dead. Pausing, I inhale deeply to aerate my lungs, mind, and spirit, to exhale the toxic waste and its fumes that have seeped into the fertile soil of my inner life, choking out dreams and visions. A deluge pours from paradise, saturating the terrain of the very essence of my being. So I thought of the rain as being God cleansing me.
Mm-hmm.
The thunder, I thought of it as all of the different thoughts that I was thinking about. I can't remember what the situation was really. I mean, to be honest with you, I hate to say this, but I'm moody. I'm a moody person. Yes, I can be very moody. I
So
mean,
I can,
sometimes I'm like, oh. So so for
so it
me,
could have been anything.
yeah, it could have been anything that was bothering me or something that I was thinking about or something that may have happened a week ago that I never talked about. I mean, I mean, I'm moody.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I try my best not to be moody, but there's some days I'm good and some days I'm like, "Oh, I just don't want to." So those
Yeah.
days, and I'm just like, like I'm all, emotional. Those are the days that
Right.
I seem to write the most. Yes.
Yeah.
So, so I was at my mom's house when I wrote Drum Rolls and Thunder.
Uh,
The other one, Kingdom, that's about, let's see, let me see, what page is that
it's
on?
on page 75.
Thank you, page 75.
Yes, ma'am.
Ah, I searched my soul to no avail to find words to describe this pain that engulfs me and leaves my stomach tied in knots. I whimper as truth digs deep into the bitter root of lies that have laced my mind, pierced my heart, and squeezed hope from my wound like invisible parasites eating away dead meat. As my mind is renewed and the dead parts of my heart and arteries are resuscitated, I pass the bitter roots and parasites through my bowels. As truth becomes my friend, I cling to only him. My heart yearns to be one uh, with him after the young Shulamite bride that yearned to be with her husband. Overwrought with mixed emotions, I watch the world around me crumble and die in vain, chasing empty dreams, fulfilling false self prophecies. The bitter vomit of lies swims in and out of their eyes, ears, and hearts, leaving trails of sticky, putrid patches of death as the stench lingers in the air everywhere. The carcass has been and on everything it has touched. My soul wails and my spirit travails, leaving my body weak and my spirit strong in the midst of death and confusion. I pursue eternal matters, kingdom truths that have empowered and catapulted my mortal body and spirit in the next paradigm. Freeing myself from all dead relationships, I have severed the tie that has tormented me for years and caused my family to scatter and never to return. I made one last attempt as a daughter and a priest to repair the break, but the crippled man chooses death and to live in denial and not to humble himself and ask for forgiveness. Choked on anger mixed with pain, fear, and frustration, an explosive cocktail that was handled with care, I blessed the mess and closed the door as I heard the silent unbelief scream from his soul. I walked away in disgust and crumbled under the heavens as rejection blanketed me and tried to kill me. But in the midst of it all, I choose life, I choose truth, I choose Christ. So this is a very personal poem about my relationship with my dad. Um, for a long, 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 long time, my dad and I didn't we didn't get along.
Mm-hmm.
He had his reasons, I had my reasons. Um, I'm a very persistent person, so when I want to know something, I'm gonna push until you tell me. But my dad never wanted to talk about a lot of stuff.
Mm,
So I had to make up my mind, like, was I going to continue to pursue a broken relationship with someone who didn't really, I'm not going to say he never wanted to be in a relationship with me. I would say that he didn't know how to be in a relationship with me. When you grow as a person from a little girl to an adult woman, you change. Your perspective about your parents change, your perspective about life changes. I wrote this in night nope, maybe um um 2000 maybe.
mm,
Um so I just made up my mind that I wanted the more out of life, and in order for me to get the more, I had to chase God.
I totally agree. And like you said, and one thing that I was amazed with is that, first of all, you said that you weren't trained as a poet. And one thing about poetry is I read a lot in high school and on my own time. The more masterful the poetry is, the more clearly it carries its meaning along with, such strong imagery. So, how did you read a lot of poetry before then, or?
Oh, no, I read a lot of books though.
Okay, okay, yeah, that's books, yeah.
um I love to read, or yeah. So reading is like one of my most favorite things to do. I'm really more of an introvert
Yeah,
than I am an extrovert. Oh yeah, because I can read a book and not talk to anybody for a couple of days. My friend's like, "What's wrong with you?" I'm like, "What's wrong with you?
you're right.
Why do we have to go anywhere? Why can't we just all just have a
Right,
cool
stay in the
down?"
house
Yeah, and read a book and
and
talk
talk
about the
about it.
book. So
Introverts in the house.
yes. So I've always been that kid that would ride my bike to the library, get my books, and lay out on the library lawn.
Mm,
That's me. Or I was always the one to ask my mom, "Ma, can I order?" I used to like to order magazines, like travel
mm,
magazines, because I like to look at the pictures and imagine all the places that I could go.
mm,
But but I've always read. Now, when I became a teenager, my most favorite thing to read were romance novels,
mm.
Harlequins to be exact. So, one summer, my grandmother had a box of Harlequin novels for me, and I
Uh,
read a book a day.
wow.
Yeah, because I love romance stories.
Right.
I do. I
And
do.
you could that's good you mentioned that because you can actually tell in especially your other point, that's how you're able to um talk about romance without it being, watered down or overdone. You know what I mean? So
But not just talk about it, but I think when I talk about romance, I'm talking about it from a very personal perspective as to what I want.
mhm,
So I don't think relationships have to be difficult, even though people make them difficult. But
right,
I think that if you really want to be with someone, you can be with that person. But it's something that relationships. I regard relationships as being sacred, just like pregnancy.
right,
So when you have a relationship, you have to be protective of that relationship, and you can't allow other people to come in, or the naysayers come in and tell you what y'all can and can't do. I don't like interference from other people.
right.
So that makes me a very private person.
Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
All righty. So we'll move along, and I have explained three of your poems. In the first one, your first poem, "If I Touch You,"
Mhm.
what meaning were you trying to get across? Most especially using the rather girly, almost fleeting tone of the poem. It's almost kind of a playful tone, like elementary school type of thing.
If I touch you, will it cause you to break? For your heart to unfold, inviting me into a world full of memories? Will they overshadow the touch of my hand or kiss of my lips? If I touch you, will it remind you where you are, have been, and want to be, walking between all three? If I touch you, I'm touching me, awakening, stirring passions and desires laid to rest, but desperate to revisit, revamp, and revision, especially walking the halls in the middle of heaven and hell translating stories. If I touch you, will it cause you to pause even when duty calls? Will the longings of my spoken and silent screams be heard in the midst of your world, your walls? Even I, as strong as I am, want to be rescued, to be the damsel in distress. But my own history informs me to run far away from you, but still I press. If I touch you, will you risk yourself to walk with me as my lover friend? I see me in you, trying to reconcile life and live congruently. If I touch you, what will you really do? So I wrote this poem about this guy that I really, 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 really like.
We
I
can
can say it like
tell.
that. Yeah.
Uh,
So, but his story, the backstory is he was or he is a veteran,
mm,
and I met him at the same time that I met him a little time before I was beginning my clinical pastoral education pro, process.
mm,
So, um, because I use the word congruently, and that's one of the things that we focus on in becoming a chaplain is what you believe and what you do the same thing. So, when people have post traumatic stress disorder or PTSD,
right.
they don't really like change. They like a very regimented and structured environment.
Mm,
And some people have issues with other people just touching them. So a it's a question on both parts. It's not just about me physically touching someone. Well, of course, me physically touching someone, but me touching someone emotionally and spiritually as well. Like if I touch you, what will you really do? If I
mm,
touch your hand, if I touch your heart, if I touch your emotions, how will that make you really feel?
mm.
So that's like that's the real question. How does my touch, whether it's mental, physical, or emotional, or even spiritual, make you feel? And what will you really do?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. Like I say, it's like you said, it was written out of pretty much a crush on a guy, but it carried a very strong meaning, and that's what was so interesting to me. Okay. Secondly, in the poem "Cocktail," that's in your second chapter, the soul chapter. In its prelude and stanzas, you say that you have been portrayed while also alluding to your worth as a woman by saying that you are made in the image of God. So, what is the meaning and background that tone of the meaning and background of the poem, especially with its spirited tone? Go
Ah, so I wrote this poem. I wrote this poem. I found out that I had fibroids, and this was like my first time ever having any kind of health issue. I'm um pretty healthy person.
right.
So, and then again, and on top of that, I wasn't married, and one of the providers told me, "Oh, you don't need a husband to have a baby. You could just go to the sperm bank." And I was like, "What?" So there I was in the doctor's office, just boo-hooing, and
Mm,
she couldn't understand why I was so upset because I was like, "Well, first of all, here you are as this white provider speaking to an African American woman in the South, telling her that she should go to the sperm bank to pick out
mm,
who you want to conceive a child by. That's number one. Number
Yeah.
two, in the African American community, with all of our different issues, most of the
Right.
African American men are in jail. And then you see the successful African American men, some of them choose not to marry African American women, and that's their choice. And I get it. So then who do I have as an African American woman to love me, to have children with, to build a future with? So I felt betrayed by God. Like, okay, I've done everything I was supposed to do, and now here I am, and I have these things called fibroids. And what do you want me to do?
Right. Hmm. Yes, ma'am. I totally understand. Like I said, it's a very, and the meaning eluded me, but now I can understand. It was a very personal poem. It was to be one among your most personal because it was a cry to God, as you said. Why? You
Yeah.
made me, as you called me precious, yet all this stuff happened. So, thank you for that. And now we go to a poem in your last chapter. Once more, to whom is the speaker of the poem referring, and what chance is being given to this person?
Again, this is written about a relationship.
Yes, man.
So, so I was in a relationship and we decided to go our separate ways, sort of,
Mm,
kind of.
yeah.
So, in the beginning of a relationship, everything is always so good. It's so, what's the word? Idealistic. They call it the
Yeah.
honeymoon phase. The
Yeah.
honeymoon.
Yeah.
It's the honeymoon phase where you can just eat that whole person up, and then when you begin to um, experience challenges or stress, you get to see when someone's stressed out. That's who the
You're a
person
real
is
person.
for real. So that's
Hmm.
that's usually the person that most people need to see is that stressed out individual, not the person who when everything is good. Because when everything is good, I think that's just a false representation of self. But anyway,
Yeah.
so so of course I wrote the poem, but it's to someone that I was in love with deeply, and we didn't work. And but
Right.
there were a lot of promises made and a lot of promises that were broken.
Hmm.
So the question was, I choose, like, my whole thing was, I choose to forgive you, but what are you gonna do? What are you gonna choose?
Hmm.
But even in me choosing to forgive the person, I still choose God.
Right.
So that's where it comes down for me.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. And I'm not gonna go too far because this is your interview, but I personally understood what you meant because in my side of life, I have experienced something like that. So that's I kind of figured. So we're gonna move away a bit from the meaning of the poems and kind of talk about the conceiving of the book and how it came together. I think the first question was, what role did mentorship have in developing your poems?
Mentorship.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm gonna tell you the story how I met the professor.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been in Alabama for approximately, I think, 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 years ago, I sent him an email, was asking him, was there a poetry writing group that I could attend? Because I was going to one in Atlanta at the Auburn Avenue Research Library, but that
Mm-hmm.
was just a, a long drive. Like, I didn't want
Yeah.
to drive like that every weekend or every other weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it all started. I just simply asked him, you know, that question. So he said, why don't you call me? And I called him and he said, why don't you come to my office? I was like, okay. So when I went to his office, I had all my poetry. I have my poetry in notebooks and
Mhm.
journals. Like I don't really
Compile
put
them.
them on the computer. No, because computers crash. So I'm like, no, 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 no. I need a hard copy. So he told me, he was like, he looked at me, people do observe. So he looked at me with my tote bag and all my poetry. He said, you might want to try putting that in
On
a
computer.
computer. And I was like, no way, computers crash. I'm not gonna do that. So I said, I can't lose. If I lose it, I lose it, but I don't want to lose it in the computer and never ever be able to get it back. So I always
Right.
have journals with all my stuff in there. And then the journals have two copies, one that's written in the journal, then one that's written on a piece of paper. It's just how
Mm-hmm.
I do my things, do my
Mm.
stuff. So then I was talking to him some more, some more, some more, some more. Actually, Professor ND is the first person that ever really mentored me in poetry.
Mm. And it went all the way up.
Yeah, he did. And I was like, are you sure? So he walked me through the editing process, and there were plenty of days that I fought with him in his office about subject verb agreement and why that sounds good the way I wrote it. So what are you talking about? Like, and he was like, really? And I was like, okay, I'm sorry, my piece is major. So when you come to that point in in the editorial process, it is
Mm.
painful because as an artist, I'll say that I'm an artist. As an artist, you're like, I don't want this to change because then you're changing the
Right.
meaning of my words. Then you're leaving behind the feeling the way I wrote it in the first place. Like, what are you doing? You're trying
Right.
to change everything that my labor of emotion and love on this piece of paper.
And
So
then you
at one point he was
just
like,
threw it out.
yeah, and he was like, no, no, no. So he chaplain, I mean, professor really taught me a lot about just the whole process. So he is my mentor.
Mm. Yes, ma'am. And I can speak from experience. He's a great mentor.
Yes, he's my mentor.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Have you received any other feedback or critical reviews from other writers or poets outside of, your writer sphere, I guess you can call it?
No, because this is like my uh first interview. So I mean, my friends, I read to them all the time in the dark. I'm like, okay, make sure you get out, turn your lights off, because I'm gonna read this poem to you. They're like, okay. And they
Yeah.
listen to me like that, but your friends think it's, because it's your stuff, they think it's good. So, but anyone outside of my friends, um, just a professor and a few people that have, that have bought the book, but
Mhm.
that's it. I haven't really had the opportunity to do any marketing the way I wanted to because the pandemic hit.
Right.
And I was like, oh, so I don't know. That's my challenge. How do I, you know, promote my book and not to be um what's the word? I was
Mhm.
very pleased and excited when I became published.
Right.
But then and he said, once you do this, your words don't belong to you anymore. And I was like, what do you mean my words don't belong to me? They my words. But he
Right.
was talking about anyone can read your book and criticize.
Right.
So that's the hard part. How do you or how do I as a person accept the criticism without taking it personal?
Right. Or being closed minded about it.
Right.
Yes, ma'am. So there has been no profiles or anything written about the book or anything, has it?
No.
Yes, ma'am. Um, okay, so you were talking about the publishing house. How did you get in contact? Because it is a traditional publishing house. How did you get it into the publishing house? Because they have to go through a review stage and things like that.
my mentor.
Yes, ma'am. That's good enough.
Because I
So,
tried for a long time. I mean, it
mm,
wasn't like 5 minutes ago. I've been trying for years and years
right,
and
I'm sure.
years and years and years. As a matter of fact, one of the people I encountered in Atlanta, he told me I just needed to throw everything away and start all over again. And I was like, wow. So I was like, okay, God, if my poetry is really that bad, I'll never write again. I don't care. So
Uh,
it's um subjective,
right.
which is hard because I think there are a lot of great writers, but just um everybody needs someone to take a chance on them.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone does, and that's the hardest part. Who is brave enough or courageous enough to take a chance or believe in you enough to say, hey, this is really good and I believe in what you've written and I believe in you as a person, that they will stick their neck out for you
Right.
and recommend you to their publishing house. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that says a lot. So when I really saw it, I was like, I think I was on cloud nine for like 3 weeks, and everybody was like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "Oh, life is so lovely." I told you I'm moody, so I'm like, "Oh, life is
I
so
would love
great.
it.
The world is beautiful. The sun is not as bright." I mean, just everything was wonderful.
Right.
But the process of even getting to that point was very painful.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of suffering,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of suffering, a lot of rejection, um no, a lot of no's. So a lot of no's, yeah. And if you're not careful, it can almost break your spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But two, I'm learning that there aren't a lot of publishing houses that even publish a lot of African American writing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, with all these black people, all these black and brown people in the world, how come no one is publishing our story? So now I see that that's the new trend. They wanna know what we have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, a lot of times, I wonder within myself, why now? Because we've been speaking all along, we've been writing all along, we've been expressing ourselves all along. So why are you now interested? Is it because of um, that we have video documentation to support what we've been saying all along, or is it because you we have and I'm not making a political statement when I say this, that we have someone in office that doesn't reflect the ideals of the United States of America? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, why now?
Right.
And now that we have um, a new platform, or we're building a new stage to be able to express ourselves, what will we say? Because you still have great authors like Cornel West and Maya Angelou and Nikki Giovanni and uh, Nikki Finney and Lauren Aileen, all of them. I know I named a bunch of women writers,
Yeah.
but they've done so much and they've suffered through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They've suffered a lot. So now that we're building a new stage, and there are other places, there are other platforms. Like I've heard that New York is like the place to be if you want
Right.
to be a writer, and I'm like, wow, why it's so cold? You know,
Yeah.
it seems like such a big, scary, busy, super busy place. You know, so I mean that's just me processing.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you? or where does the Southern voice have a platform?
Hmm. Yes, ma'am. I totally agree. Especially, yeah, black folks around the world, and like you said, people of color around the world have problems, but especially in America, Southern blacks, that's a big problem. So thank you for that. So we're getting ready to wrap up. A question I think I asked you is, what advice do you have for young women who want to write poetry and or even prose writings on their emotions and experiences unadulterated as a woman, especially to African American young women?
To write, to write. If
Hmm.
if we don't tell our story or we don't talk about how we feel when we encounter different situations, then someone else can tell us how we feel.
Right.
And no one can tell me how I feel because I know how I feel because I usually put it in a poem.
Hmm.
So, and no one can discredit or um what's the word? Push me to the side
Yeah.
to say that my words don't count or my voice doesn't count. Because I've been talking for a long time. My mom says I came out talking. So I've been talking for a long time
Yes, ma'am.
and I'm going to be heard. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm
Hmm.
going to be heard. Yes. And I think more African American women, I think Bell Hooks said, not enough Black women write. And that's the truth.
Right.
We don't write enough. I mean, I know we come from a strong history of oral traditions and oral storytelling. And I think that's awesome because I'm not a storyteller, but I am a writer. And
Mhm.
that's I how I express myself in writing.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. So, thank you. I've exhausted all of my questions. So to wrap this interview up, if you do not mind, can you pick out of your poetry collection and whatnot the best poem you think you've written and read it to us and just explain why you like it, love it so much,
Hmm. It's gonna be
Hmm.
um My Soul Sings on page 86.
Yes, ma'am.
My soul sings a soft, sultry moaning blues. Sarah Vaughan lets from highs to lows as she croons, winds over and wraps around what was lost and maybe will never be. My soul sings the blues in its deep, husky bass baritone voice of Billie Holiday, slurring inaudible groanings over pain endured, witnessing the depths of strange fruit that hung from limbs of trees that were knotted with hate, ripped with heart tissue, and bruised bones and tendons down to the white meat, where chips of my soul were broken off. Their blood cries out from the soil. My soul sings, belting from its gut what it wants, like Etta James, who yelled, I want to love that last past Saturday night. That raw mixture of passionate emotion causing the hairs on the back of my neck to stand and applaud. The bluesy, soulful, rich R&B that lulls and electrifies the spirit to move, sway, dance, or tap my toes, demanding what it wants, not gentle, soft pleadings to compromise. My soul laments with a tear stained face, like my sister Jill Scott, pleading to live and not die in her misery of pain, of disbelief and disenfranchisement, of what following the rules brings, knee bent and body bowed, broken with no core strength to even pull my chin to my knees where the weight of my heart is carried. In the center of my womb where life grows, is birthed, nurtured, and flows. My soul sings that old Negro spiritual, motherless child, while standing in an open field, heaping ashes upon my head, wailing, though choked on sobs with bloodshot eyes. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home, in a foreign land without a familiar face, no comfort, no place to call home. Oftentimes wondering, God, do you really care? Do you really see me? This world, oh Lord, was not designed for me. I'm almost gone with nothing left to give.
My soul travails during the midnight hour, twixt and tween, before dusk and dawn, doubled over in a fetal position, with the voice of Mahalia Jackson singing over my soul. Trouble of this world, assuring me soon I will be done with the troubles of this world, and I can go home and live with my Lord. My soul is uneasy, like a clanging gong, as it rolls from hope to hopelessness, grasping for that fine line of faith, that invisible string that keeps my soul still, my heart at ease, and my mind bound together, holding on to the amazing grace while a particular song gently plays in the backdrop of my life. It is well with my soul. My soul sings, my soul sings, my soul sings.
Mm, there's an amen to that. Yes, man. Well, as I said, that's all of my questions. I really enjoyed this interview. You very thoroughly answered my questions, and I hope this interview is a very good window into your world of poetry and how you wrote it. Especially in the fact that you are not trained as a poet, but you use what you read and what you experienced to create just as good as a book of poetry to be added to any of the other great African American poets and the rest of the world. So,
Thank you.
yes, ma'am. Thank you, Miss J. Eileen, for your time. I really appreciate it. And thank everyone for watching. And that concludes the interview.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.